Thank you. I think we'll get underway. My name is Jonathan Friedland. I write for The Guardian, been covering the Israel-Palestine conflict in one form or other for nearly 3 decades. I'm going to be chairing this session. I can't promise newsworthy revelations to match Jeremy Corbyn being outed as a Zionist by his shadow foreign secretary, self-evidently and of course. Full quotes to come. But hopefully we will have a very lively session all the same. Let me say something about how we're going to run it and then introduce our panelists and we'll get straight into it. We are going to hear from the 3 gentlemen up here. I'm afraid we're not with the diversity programme up here. It is 4 men you have. I apologise for that. You'll hear from each of them individually for 6 to 8 minutes. I'm going to be quite firm about timing. I might then ask a sort of clarifying or hopefully clarifying follow-up question to that speaker. Then we will have a little bit of discussion up here, hopefully teasing out some of the questions from those positions, and then we will of course open it up to discussion. So why don't I get on with explaining who we're going to hear from. On my immediate left here is Major General Amos Gilad, who has held pretty well every key portfolio in the Israeli military that you could want for this purposes of this discussion. 30 years in the IDF, including a stint as head of military intelligence, as coordinator of government activities in the West Bank and Gaza, and as the military secretary to then Prime Minister. I'm sorry?
Not only Gaza, it's...
I said West Bank. No. Yeah, West Bank and Gaza.
It's like Abu Mazen without being elected.
Yeah, we'll throw in Jericho if you want. We can have that conversation. But no, the West Bank and Gaza, and also, I thought importantly, military secretary to the Prime Minister and Defence Minister of the time, Yitzhak Rabin, whose the anniversary of whose assassination is just a couple of days away. Also, I think importantly, Amos Gilad was part of the Israeli team negotiating as part of the Oslo process. So we'll hear from him first. After that, we're going to hear from Sir John Jenkins, whose experience in British diplomacy in the Middle East is pretty well unparalleled. He was the UK ambassador to Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Saudi Arabia, and served as Britain's Consul General in Jerusalem, and known to many people more recently as the author of a policy review on the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam for then Prime Minister David Cameron, and now I think teaches at Yale University. So that is, he's going to speak next. And finally, completing our panel, our host, in a way, on our immediate right, the Chief Executive of BICOM and a frequent commentator on Middle East affairs, and no stranger to British government, where he was the former Deputy Director of UK Government Communications and a senior civil servant, James Soreen. So that's the lineup. And Major General, I'm going to ask you to kick us off with this focus. We've heard a lot about the history of obviously the region and the Balfour Declaration. The purpose now this afternoon is to be a bit more forward-looking, to talk about the present and future. And we would love to hear from you, particularly, I think, on how the threats and opportunities, threats and challenges from Israel's point of view in the region. Obviously, there's been huge attention over recent years over Syria. The Prime Minister of your country draws great attention to Iran. He sees it as the great strategic threat. But obviously, given the Balfour Declaration, we're going to want to hear you talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well. So if you would, if you're happy to speak there, good. Otherwise, you could, no, the podium's been moved away. So from your position there, if you would like to kick us off on with 6 or 8 minutes of your perspective on the threats and challenges as you see.
Because if I do have 6 minutes, if I go there, I lose half minute.
Yes, that's quite true.
Thank you for inviting me to celebrate this anniversary. It's very moving, I must say, not for the politeness. In 6 minutes, I would like to share with you lights and shadows. It's very moving. We do have unique security. I'm talking about security mainly because it's not public. To have public relationship in Middle East is very difficult. Everything is like standards of other professions. However, against the past, that the Arab countries were our worst enemies, and they try their best to send us to the sea, to the Mediterranean, Now we do enjoy unprecedentedly excellent relationship, security cooperation based on common threats, like Iran, Muslim Brothers, Daesh, IS, and so on. And if I look eastward, our security border is between Iraq and Jordan. All terror organizations want to visit us from Jordan and they keep failing. The Allenby Bridge, or King Hussein Bridge, it has 2 million people passing this bridge, crossing this bridge annually. Why 2 million? Because the capacity of this bridge is 2 million. And if we widen it to 4 million, there will be 4 million. We do have security coordination with the Palestinian Authority against the image. And I need to praise Abu Mazen in one aspect. He is against terror, unlike Arafat that was in favor of terror, and he played with terror and peace together. This cohabitation is impossible. You cannot murder. I mean, in the Middle East, everything is possible, however, in my opinion. Another good news, of course, it's our security and good relationship with the US that's known. With UK, it has developed dramatically if I compare it to 100 years ago. And, really, and with other European countries. We do not suffer now, we do suffer from the lowest level of terror since ever in Israel. Why? First, after we failed 17 years ago in the second Intifada, I did it myself, we shared with the government strategic early warning, but it didn't help because we were not prepared. So we suffered losses, casualties, fatalities, economic damages. Our huge hotels looked like haunted houses. You could hear the echo of your steps because nobody was there. Now we are enjoying the best era for terror.
Which is the period you just referred to then? When the
17 years ago, the second Intifada, with 17 years ago,
17,
2000,
I see, yes.
17.
Yeah.
Now we are enjoying the best era from terror point of view because we are using excellent intelligence. To be terrorist in Israel, it's not recommended profession, unlike criminals. Criminals are not treated the same efficiency. However, terrorists, 100% they are caught, most of them before the acts of terror, and the rest after. It's based on unique intelligence and technology that is serving us. We also have defeated with difficulties. First, we failed the stabbings, because the stabbings is deriving, it's like individual, you know. How can you know that somebody gets up in the morning and want to kill Jews? You cannot know, however, there is a way to know. And we have diminished it dramatically. That's about the good news in 6 minutes. The very bad news is Iran and Iran and Iran. It's not our prime minister, it's a position of all, there is consensus in Israel, in the defense establishment, in the intelligence establishment. We used to enjoy unique cooperation with UK about the information. And Iran, they are playing strategic game, unfortunately. They are waiting for the collapse of Daesh. Daesh will collapse as caliphate. I'm not talking about terror in London or terror in Paris or ideology. That's a different story. As caliphate, if I use, in my interpretation, the famous speech of President Lincoln, he used to, I'm changing it. You cannot abuse the whole system all the time, and you cannot fight against the whole world all the time. So they are going to lose. They will lose very soon, this year, 2 months from now, or next year, 4 months from now. They are doomed as caliphate. However, who will replace them? Iran. They are playing strategic game. They want to enhance their grip on Lebanon. I call Lebanon constitution without state. This is tragedy. There are states with constitution, states without constitution, and unique phenomenon in political science, that's Lebanon. Beautiful country, with beautiful constitution, without government. They don't know anything that's going on. Hezbollah, on behalf of Iran, has taken over the whole area from Beirut to our border. If tomorrow Hezbollah attacks us with 100,000 rockets, for example, we will be forced to retaliate. The president of Lebanon will read it in the newspapers. He will not be updated about the attack. And who elected him? Mr. Nasrallah, that he is agent of Iran. That's tragedy. There are many illusions. There is Lebanese army and so on that's supported by the West. There is no Lebanese army because there is no Lebanese state. That's tragedy. And nothing is done. And I think it will be worse and worse. Now they are building, the Iranians, the second layer of missiles. The difference between rocket and missiles, the missile is accurate. According to international press, we are preventing it. However, that's like continuous war. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad, the rumors about his disappearance are too early, and he's going to continue unless somebody will kill him, and that's not included in his plans. By the way, he was born in 9/11, so he will continue to cut the cake every 9/11 as his birthday. This, I think he's a psycho. He allowed North Korea to build military nuclear site, allegedly, in the desert that was controlled by Daesh. Can you imagine Daesh controlling military nuclear North Korean one? It could be a reflection of hell. There are too many miracles. I'm not religious, but I'm secular believer in miracles. Because otherwise it's very difficult to explain how it was discovered and how it was removed. Now, to the point, Bashar al-Assad depends on Iran. He's going to allow them to deploy forces, proxies, Shiite militias, and we are going to face, if I use the famous saying of King Abdullah II of Jordan, the Shiite crescent is going to happen. Iran, Iraq, Syria, so-called Lebanon, and so on. That's our main challenge. And vis-a-vis the agreement. We think this agreement is the worst one. I don't have the time to explain. However, Iran thinks that after 10 years, -2 that have passed since it was signed, that they are entitled to develop nuclear weapon. Nuclear weapon for Israel is impossible, I think, for the whole world, for the Arabs, for Saudi Arabia. The immediate enemy of Iran today is Saudi Arabia, even before Israel. For Israel, they are planning special program for the long run. Long run, I mean, let's say 20 years, 30 years. For Saudi Arabia, it depends on them. It might disappear tomorrow. So altogether, this is the main threat, the main challenge. We do have Russia. The Russians have taken decision to support this alliance, Iran, Hezbollah, Bashar Assad, because of many reasons. And it's like we are facing now new bloc, anti-American, British, Arab, Sunni Arab, and so on. We are facing it just now. About the Palestinians, it has been mentioned by the Honorable Member of Parliament and Shadow Secretary. I think we need this peace process. I'm not optimistic. I used to be a coordinator. It's called coordinator. It's like Abu Mazen, as I've said, without being elected. He was not elected. I was not elected. I do have the illusions that all Palestinians would vote for me if I presented my candidacy, but I didn't have the courage to test it. So I would like to share with you, I've spent a long time with the Palestinians. I was the head of our security track, a member of all our peace efforts. I'm not sure we can achieve peace. For example, there is split between Hamas and Fatah. There is reconciliation. What does it mean, reconciliation? Hamas want to kill Abu Mazen. The one who signed this agreement with the Palestinian Authority was responsible for attempt to murder Abu Mazen, physically. And they want to they do have strategic plan to take over Ramallah and West Bank in order to establish. Thanks God, the Hamas very weak. That's why they need the reconciliation. We have discovered just some days ago, what we call offensive tunnel. What does it mean, offensive tunnel? They are penetrating underground and killing many Israelis. That's not exactly peaceful, convincing, peaceful effort. So altogether, I think we need to do our best. I don't believe personally that we can normalize our relationship with Israel without the Palestinian conflict. That's why it's so essential to do our best. I'm not sure that will achieve the peace. And we need to enhance this relationship, as I said, with the Arabs. That is some kind of miracle, but it's very fragile and is subject to dramatic changes if they occur based on the past. So to conclude, we are living in the best era of time from security point of view. It gives many opportunities to the government. On the other hand, like horizon, like forecast, you can see the heavy clouds, but unlike weather, we can change it, we can have impact to cope with it efficiently, and that's what we are going to do.
Thank you. Just on that last point about the best ever time for security, is there a contradiction between that on the one hand and your talk about the importance of a peace process in this sense, which is that actually people always used to say about the conflict, it's unsustainable. Actually, because it's day-to-day security is there, it's very sustainable. So there's no great Israeli incentive to pursue a peace process because day-to-day security is there.
It
So why
depends
not
who you
maintain the
ask.
status quo?
I think we need it, and not for. We are not doing it for the Palestinians. We need it for us.
But if security for you, for Israeli people day-to-day is fine, what would be the incentive?
The incentive is first of all, I don't want to live in one state with Palestinian majority. We need it for us. Secondly, I think that's under dispute in Israel. If you compare it to some official declaration, I don't believe that we can normalize our relationship with the Arabs, and to rely only on security, it's very dangerous because it's like tree with one root. One root is subject to hurricanes that might destroy it. And hurricanes in the Middle East, I'm talking about political hurricanes. We don't have the hurricanes like in US, but we might have even more dangerous. We need to do our best to stabilize. I personally, I've served decades in the army. However, I don't believe in war unless it's last resort. So we need to take alternatives like peace, like diplomacy, security diplomacy, efficient diplomacy, to enhance our relationship with UK. Very important, I can tell you. It's very sensitive, but I can share with you that at least your intelligence service, the MI6, that I used to work intensively in the other services, are excellent. I think they are the best in the world. Maybe it will surprise you, however, that's true. And
Better even than your
not only
relationships with
about
the
collection, not about. I don't compare because I don't want embarrassment.
You just said they were the best in the world, so that's
I can say it in
comparing.
every country. However, I'm saying it in every country. No, I can say. I'm not saying. What I'm sharing with you, it's the whole truth, nothing but the truth,
Okay.
and the truth itself.
You said not only collection, not only.
In two aspects: in collection and in assessment.
Okay. So John, let's come to you. The ground in a way has been rolled, the pitch has been rolled a bit by what Major General Gilad has said with this perspective on the wider region, but from your experience of serving in so many of those places, are you able to gaze into the crystal ball a bit and see how developments in Iran, Saudi Arabia, the rest of the region, and particularly this notion of a Shiite crescent and then a sort of Sunni crescent countering it? How do you see it?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm not a diplomat anymore, so I don't have to be diplomatic. I wasn't that diplomatic anyway, I don't think, back in the day. I also don't suffer from the British reluctance to accept compliments. So Amos's point about SIS, I think, is absolutely right, and thank you for that. I want to start with the Gulf, and I want to start with this current so-called Gulf crisis, because it encapsulates both the past and the future, and the present, in an extremely interesting way. And I call it so-called because people are getting very agitated about this, and I simply don't understand why. I don't understand why people think if Qatar is frozen out of this collection of nations in the Gulf, it's such a disaster. I mean, the issue about Al Udeida Air Base is manageable wherever Qatar sits in this constellation. And it's not about egos, which is what people quite often say. And I'm not saying that there aren't egos involved. There are egos involved in every conflict in the Middle East. But fundamentally, the quarrel within the GCC is about the future of the region and about the nature of states in the region. If somebody had said to me, my very first post in the Middle East was Abu Dhabi 36 years ago, and if somebody said to me then that the Emirates would be the sort of state, the sort of country it is now, I'd have thought they were crazy. If somebody had said that the centre of political gravity in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East as a whole, would move towards the Gulf, away from the old Republican states of the north, I'd have thought they were crazy. Because, of course, in those days, we all thought that this was a fixed and absolute dispensation in the Middle East. What we've seen since the 1980s, particularly, of course, since 2003 and through the Arab Spring period, is that nothing is permanent in the Middle East. And this power has shifted in a quite dramatic way. And when you think of the attitude that the Emiratis and the new Saudi, whatever you call it, ruling dispensation, government regime, has towards Qatar, and indeed towards the question particularly of Sunni political Islamism, but also to Islamisms of all sorts. This is not something that happened overnight. And one of the problems they have with Qatar, and I've had with Qatar for at least a decade, and in some cases for more than 20 years, has been Qatar's instrumentalization of political Islamism in its own particular national, sectional and family interests. Hunting with the hounds and running with the fox. And the lessons that the Emiratis and the Saudis learned over this last 30 years is that to play with political Islamism is to play with fire. The Saudis discovered this partly through Afghanistan, the experience of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, but more particularly through the growth of what is called the Islamic awakening inside Saudi Arabia, the Sahwa, which was a mixture of Salafi doctrines and Muslim Brotherhood political mobilization. It was this political mobilization that spooked them. There's a famous interview from 2002 from the late Prince Nayef when he says, "We hosted the Muslim Brotherhood, we thought they were on their side, it turned out they betrayed us." It also spooked the Emiratis, and it spooked the Emiratis for particular reasons, some to do with the way that the Brotherhood had penetrated the educational and other institutions of the civil and social space in the Emirates from the 1950s onwards, as they had elsewhere. But it was the Emiratis who woke up to this, I think, first, along with the Saudis. And it's this that they think Qatar has been undermining. When I was in Libya in 2011, the Qataris had a military mission which they sent in to Benghazi and Tobruk, which basically sat there bringing in C-130s every week full of weapons and money, which they were diverting to Islamist militias, notably 17 February in Benghazi, but also to the remnants of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group over in the west, over in Tripoli. The Emiratis, in the meantime, were fighting with the Zentani militias up in the Jebel Nafusa, which is just above Tripoli to the south. Now, one of the reasons I particularly liked the Zentani militias was because they could source Jack Daniels for us when we were in Libya, which nobody else could. But that also, I mean, that sounds a bit frivolous, but it also tells you something about the way that they think of themselves. And if you look at the annual surveys of Arab youth, which are conducted by Asda Bursa Marstella, which have been going now for about 25 years, and so have a series of data sets, consistently, the one country that young Arabs, a plurality of young Arabs, want their country to be like, or want themselves to live and work in, is the Emirates, is the UAE. Now, personally, I liked Dubai back in the day. I liked Dubai back in the 1980s because it conformed to my idea of what a Gulf city should look like. It had old little wind towers and lots of. Now it's glitzy. It's like LA with the highways and everything. And I loathe it, but it's not. It's irrelevant what I think. If a plurality of young Arabs like it, they're doing something right. What is this thing they're doing right? They have a deep security state, which basically gives people a sense of stability and security. And we saw this through the Arab Spring, that people wanted security and stability. And there was a flight to security and stability after the victory of Islamists in Libya, in Egypt, and so forth. They also want a degree of social permissiveness, which is the thing that they bolted onto the top of the Emirates. And this is a model that you find nowhere else in the Middle East. Economically, it's highly successful. Ideologically, it's fragile, with 1 million nationals and a population of 10 million. It's also the model, I think, that is quite clear that Mohammed bin Salman wants to introduce in Saudi Arabia. Now, I think it's more problematic in Saudi to do this than it is in the Emirates. But if you think about it as a model, in comparison with the other models available in the Middle East, what's not to like about this for us? I don't get it that people say that everything should be papered over in the Gulf, that GCC unity, which never existed from the beginning, from 1981, should be restored, this mythical restoration of something that never existed, which is a common trope in the Middle East, and that essentially we should all calm down, or they should all calm down. They will not calm down. This will not be fixed tomorrow, whatever telephone calls take place, because this represents a fundamental difference of opinion about where the Middle East should go. The Saudis and the Emiratis have also been spooked by the success of Daesh in Syria and in Iraq. And they think whatever happens in Mosul and Raqqa and the other places, Tikrit, Ramadi and so forth, Daesh will remain an ideational threat to them, particularly to Saudi Arabia, which of course bases its claims to legitimacy and sovereignty on a reading of the Quran, on revelation, but acts as a state within a Westphalian system of other states. And they're especially spooked by Iran. And being spooked by Iran is not simply a question of the last 5 years or 10 years. This is something that goes back to the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, and indeed to the turning point of the modern Middle East, which is 1979, which was the Iranian Revolution and also Juhayman's seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. They also see connections between the forms of Islamism that Sunni Islamists adopt from the Brotherhood onwards, and the forms of Islamism that Shia Islamists adopt in Iran. If you look at the system in Iran, with Rabaa-e-Azam, the supreme leader in Iran, the supreme leader looks like the Murshid of the Muslim Brotherhood, looks like the Caliph in Daesh, and so forth. This sort of this metaphysical expression of sovereignty based on revelation, which terrifies them, as it should actually terrify us. If you look at the recent figures that David Pollock of the Washington Institute has produced from polling in Qatar and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, the biggest single threat in all these countries is seen as Iran. None of them like the Muslim Brotherhood much either, actually, which is a misreading we tend to make about the authenticity of expressions of Islamism in the Sunni states of the Middle East. But Iran is a big issue. And if you look strategically at what's happened since 2003 in the Great Levant, which is Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, the strategic winner has been Iran. You look now at what's happened in Iraq, you look at the Kurdish referendum, which was a disaster. Barzani overreached, it was stupid what they did. But the policy response, in my view, was even stupider, because essentially saying you are in favour of the Iraqi central state, which doesn't really exist, taking back control of the north, essentially means that you're backing al-Hashd Sha'bi, which are the Iranian-backed militias, and indeed the Revolutionary Guards and elements of the standing Iranian army, who basically are controlling, directing, and in some cases doing this fighting. If you look at what's happening around Kirkuk, around Tel Afar, around Tuzkamatur, and all these key areas which control the routes from Iraq into Syria and across into Lebanon, they are being controlled by Iran. This is the big threat of our time. And I say to people, the next war is going to break out in southern Syria. And it's going to break out in southern Syria because southern Syria, the Golan, the Syrian Golan, the Hawran, the Jebel Druze, is where people like Qasem Soleimani, Amos' great friend Hajj Hashim, who was the commander of Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, and various commanders of the Basij in Iran stroll around, get themselves photographed, looking at Israel through field glasses. This is telling you something. And if you look at the way that Hezbollah has transformed itself over the last 5 years, from an organization which had maybe 10, 15,000 soldiers fighting for it, doing essentially static defense in the south of Lebanon, static defense, to an organization that is equipped with artillery with tanks, which does maneuver warfare, it does urban warfare, it does logistics, it does planning, it does all the J functions, the 6 J functions that NATO armies do. The only thing it doesn't have is an air force. It has rockets and missiles instead. This seems to me to be the major threat for the future.
Thank you very much. Much that we can follow up and will follow up. I would just wonder what you would say, whether you would accord with what Amal said about ISIS and the notion of the caliphate collapsing, and it's a matter of time before Iran steps in. It's just playing a waiting game, stepping in for that. When you say the region is spooked by Iran, does that fit with what Amal said, that even once ISIS has been, nominally defeated?
Daesh's control of territory is about to be destroyed. But this has happened in the past. When I was in Iraq, 2009 through 2011, what was then Al Qaeda, what had been Al Qaeda in the land of the two rivers, was reduced to carrying out drive-by shootings, sticky bombs, car bombs inside Baghdad. But they never went away. And when Mosul fell, what we saw in Mosul was that they had planted a set of seeds in Mosul which had never gone away. And they had prepared Mosul by a campaign of target assassinations in the same way as they did in Fallujah and Ramadi. And you can see them preparing now their fallback positions in Diyala, which is up against the Iranian border, in parts of Anbar, out in Libya, in the Sinai. This is an ideology. You cannot kill an ideology except through other more successful ideologies. It's the old. And the problem with this is, when we had a Cold War and the contest was between the United States and Russia, the Soviet Union, who produced the best toasters, you can test that because you just put a piece of bread in and see which does it best. If your pitch is, we deliver salvation, that's a much more difficult thing to combat. And that's the thing that Daesh specialised in. It's the thing that Al-Qaeda specialised in before them. Yeah. It's the thing that the Muslim Brotherhood specialised in before them. That's much more difficult.
Thank you. We'll pick up more of that when we get on. Let's hear from our third speaker, James. Sorry, you're going to particularly talk about we haven't really much talked about Britain, but I think you'll talk perhaps about the outside players, US and Russia. And I just wonder whether you'll pick up Amos Gilad's point that Russia has sort of placed its bet alongside that, if you like, that Shiite crescent with Iran and with Hezbollah in Syria, etc.
Yeah, so is the sound okay? I need to twist it. So to talk about Russia and America, I think the reason why we should give it some focus, and we'll maybe talk about this a bit more, is as we know, through the last decades, the action and the inaction of Russia and America in the region sends shockwaves far down through history in many, many, many different ways. To pick up John's point about ideas, the idea of what, say, America has done or not done, and the reaction to that is incredibly important in a number of different ways, whether it be the development of radical Islam, if you look at Al-Qaeda, Daesh, and all the narrative that they have. What America is perceived to have done or not done are the key sort of cataclysmic moments in the development of their theology. It's absolutely fundamental. If you look at the way Iran and Iranians see the region, they will tell you about 1953 and how the CIA and the British deposed the Mossadegh administration. They will talk about the 1979 revolution, etc. They see what America did and what Britain did as absolutely fundamental. It's interesting for a moment to put ourselves back in 1917, where we started the day. And the reason why I say that is because actually, around the end of the First World War was the first moment where someone actually suggested that America should intervene in the Middle East. It's a footnote in history, but there was a moment where everyone was looking round and saying who should take the mandate of what country and who should do what. And someone said, well, maybe America could do it. And America very wisely said, no, thank you. They were not ready yet, but it was certainly almost at the passing of the baton between Britain, that was almost at the end of its imperial moment and the absolute height of its imperial power, and people were saying, well, maybe America can do this instead. So that was sort of 100 years ago. So it tells you how far we have come. Just to focus a little bit on, I think, the goals maybe into the future and the strategy around Russia and America, and then to go into a bit more detail. Let's focus on Russia for a moment. Now, it's absolutely the case that Russia's played a blinder in terms of what they've done in Syria. Russia made the difference. And if you talk about action and inaction, you've got two processes at work. The moment where Obama decided that he would not do anything even though Assad had crossed his own red line in August 2013, that moment where he decided not to do that is traced by many analysts as the moment where America stepped back from the Middle East, rightly or wrongly. If you look at the hard power that sits in many of the countries in the Gulf and elsewhere, it's awesome in terms of what America has, but the question is, are you going to use that power? And so America didn't use that power in 2013 when they could have done, and that was seen as one sign. Sign number two was the signing of the Iran nuclear deal and the narrative that the Obama administration put around that of sort of sharing the Middle East, I think were his words, about how Iran and Saudis in the Gulf needed to understand that there had to be some kind of sharing. And that spooked a lot of people. That was the moment where people thought America is departing from the Middle East. And you get a lot of things that happen after that, but jumping ahead, the situation in southern Syria and the decision by the US not to intervene, not to put forces on the ground, to let this thing play out, because they didn't feel that they could make the decisive difference without very, very severe bloody consequences and being drawn in with people they weren't sure they wanted to be drawn into. That was seen as the moment where Russia stepped in. And Russia did something that's very fundamental to its strategy, is to make the maximum amount of impact with the least amount of hardware and putting people in harm's way. People talk a lot about Russia's intervention, but I think they basically shifted the balance with a quite small number of aircraft. They provided the air cover to the Hezbollah, the Iranian, other militias on the ground in the Syrian regime. But they tipped the balance. It was a moment for Iran to realize it couldn't tip the balance on its own, but Russia was the decisive factor. And so what people saw from that was a Russian strategy of, decades in the making, but it was very, very, very clear. Russia sticks by its allies. It won't let them down. Russia is there for the long term. Russia wants a presence on the Mediterranean. It's part of its whole geopolitical strategy. Russia, just early this year, signed a lease on an airbase, I think, for 49 years. They're not leaving anytime soon. And they also have the seaport Tartus on the Mediterranean. They are there for the long term. And they have very clear objectives. They want a Mediterranean presence. They want a market for the Russian arms industry, which is hugely significant in the Russian economy. Millions of Russians are employed in it, and I think they saw their intervention as a way to showcase what they could do. And here was another surprise for Russia as well, was that the weapons worked. They worked they were effective. And it's no surprise that since that has been played out, you've seen people like Turkey looking at buying the S-400 anti-aircraft missiles. You've seen even Egypt talking about buying more hardware from the Russians. It's very, very significant. So Russia has shown that it has a strategy. It's prepared to implement its strategy. The question is, gazing into the crystal ball, what's going to happen after this? Now, The Economist did a brilliant piece, it was just last week, where they described Vladimir Putin as almost like a czarist regime. But what they said he was missing was, yes, he had all the absolute power, he had the absolute single-minded focus on retaining power and controlling everything, but he didn't have the institutions around him. He doesn't have ideas, he doesn't have a party. What really happens after Vladimir Putin in a complete patronage network around him, we don't know. So in 8 years' time, we don't know what's going to happen, but certainly strategically they're there for the long term. So let's talk about America briefly. I can't really say what my idea is of what America's strategy is in the Middle East at the moment. They've definitely decided that IS was the focus, and destroying IS was very, very important in terms of what they were doing in Syria. And then we had a situation just recently where the Trump administration says now they are focusing a great deal on Iran. And very wise people in various American think tanks have said, if you're going to be the American president, you've got to do something big in foreign policy. You've got to make it one of your top 3 goals. And if you don't, you can't have a basket of things. So either they need to set out what exactly their strategy is. Is it Iran? Is it something else? Are they trying to stop extremism and terror? What are they actually doing? But they're having to make up a lot of lost ground in Syria. And there is a moment that's going to come very soon, as I agree with what was said about, the next conflict is going to happen around there in southern Syria, where all these forces come together, is what is America going to do? After IS is defeated, is America going to pack up? And are the Brits also going to pack up? Or are they going to actually, swing south, do something significant to stop the completion of this Shia Iranian crescent moving all the way across the Middle East? And I think if you look at, just to conclude around, I remember when I was a politics student, and you try and understand, what is it a great power is trying to do? How do you define the nature of politics? It's power, authority, and influence. And the interesting thing about America at the moment, America has great, great power. It's losing its influence, and it's losing its authority. Russia maybe has less power, and maybe has less authority, but for various reasons of doing the maximum it possibly can with very little, it has huge influence.
Thank you. Were that all? Yep. All 3 of those are very useful. Let's have tease out some of the themes here. All 3 of you converge on this point about Iran, and you described it as being, if you like, one of the sort of clouds on the horizon that you can see coming. And you made this point about potentially coming conflict. So in a way, if we take as read from the three of you, that you all see that as a source of concern, the rising influence of Iran, let's talk about potential remedies or action that those who are worried might take, whether it's the Gulf states, whether it's their allies, and I think it would be good, given the locus and focus of this conversation, Britain and what Britain might do. So just let's zero in on this point about Iran. Well, since we haven't heard from you for a while, why don't we start with you, Amos, on if we accept your premise that Iran is a problem, certainly for Israeli policymakers, what to be done about it?
First, we need to recognize the problem. There is too much ignorance in the world about the international issues. I've discussed it with my dear friend. Secondly, Israel must prevent, I think with the whole world, nuclear Iran. If Iran gets nuclear, I can assure you that the Arabs will follow them. In Arabic there is a word, not all words can be translated. Ajami, it's Persian, that's technical translation. For the Arabs, it's a matter of contempt, hatred, everything. All words you have about the combination between hatred and contempt.
Majus.
They will
Majus.
They will never accept nuclear Iran. In Iran, only half of the population is Persians. So it's like 35, maybe more. In Cairo itself, while we are talking, there are 20 or 23 million people. Until we end this meeting, there will be more. In this area, they are very creative. So Saudis do have suspicious connections with Pakistan, another problem we haven't discussed. The Egyptians can do it. They will never accept nuclear Iran. So if there is nuclear Iran, for Israel, it's unacceptable because they will threaten us, they will become existential threat. The Western logic that they will never dare to use a nuclear weapon, it's Western logics. Western logics is not obliging anybody. So we need to be united for peace, need to be united against nuclear Iran. This must be prevented. We can discuss whether to cancel agreement or not. That's a tactical
That's
discussion.
a means to the end, the agreement.
Whatever you call it. The strategic goal must be no nuclear Iran. Secondly, if they get back to the nuclear, the sanctions must be resumed. They cannot tolerate sanctions. How do I know it? That's why they have agreed upon the. I mean, Rouhani, against his image, he's not moderate. He's a smart guy. That his job is to cause economic recovery of the collapse in Iran. They cannot tolerate sanctions like that. And we need cooperation. We need Intel cooperation. We used to have it. I've mentioned the example. And we need to enhance, if we can, from Israeli point of view, that's my accommodation, the Sunni Arab with Western countries coalition. It's very fragile. We must not save Qatar. I'm not sure I'm not in minority. Because I call Qatar a mixture of too much money, too high temperatures, and too few people. And that's why they are so attractive. Why they are so attractive? They are supporting Muslim Brothers. They are supporting all vicious forces. They are against the stable Arabs. They want to destabilize them. Al Jazeera used to murder American soldiers. The fact that there is American, I'm repeating what has been said. I think we need to say, and another issue that is unpopular in UK and other Western countries, we cannot force them to be democratic. In our area, beside Israel, if you force it, that's patronizing attitude that I dislike anyway. However, if you force them to have democracy, you will have the Muslim Brothers.
Yep.
Muslim Brothers believe in one election successful. This is the first one and the last one. And they are depriving rights of women. The women position, by the way, in the Arab, not by the way, is getting worse and worse. We are talking all the time strategically. What about women, their children? If I talk about their position, it will take me 1 hour. So, but besides that, we need to prioritize stability for the sake of our democracy.
Just on this point about Iran, you moved between two things. You said several times, we must stop them becoming nuclear. And then you said, if they become nuclear, there'll be a further arms race among Arab states and there'll have to be sanctions reimposed. But I'm trying to get clear. You're saying that there's no scenario in which Israel would tolerate them becoming nuclear, allowing, and then sanctions are reimposed. Israel would take whatever steps it deemed necessary to stop that eventuality ever coming.
It's not contradictory, because if I say there will be no nuclear Iran, it does not oblige Iran not to be nuclear. It depends what will be done.
I thought what you were suggesting was that Israel will take whatever military action is required.
I never suggest
I know
military
action. You didn't. I'm just trying to decode.
I would like to share with you my philosophy.
I'm trying to
we need to do, not to talk.
Yeah.
If I talk, it means we will not do. If we do, maybe we will not talk.
So
that's the order.
Okay. What about British policy, John Jenkins, on Iran particularly? Okay. Because I'm hearing from what Amos Gilad said and what you hear from the Americans, a lot of impatience with this deal, and yet Theresa May, an unusual break from Donald Trump, actually was very explicit. She didn't condemn him about breaking from the Paris Agreement, but she really did go after him for what he'd said about the Iran deal. So there's a difference between you and Amos Gilad on the Iran deal, I think.
Not much. The Iran deal, the nuclear deal, JCPOA is not great. It's not perfect. It basically buys us 15 years, and then that's it. But it's better than nothing. And in the end, I think the negotiations were not handled brilliantly. But they're what we have, and there's no point at all in ditching this deal. The deal's there. And the issue for the Arab states of the region wasn't about Iran as a nuclear power at the moment. It's about what everything else Iran is doing. Now, the interesting thing for me, and this comes interesting thing about what we do about it, about the JCPOA, I think it's pretty clear that the Obama administration thought, in spite of the fact they denied it, this would be transformational in a wider sense in Iran. Now, Iran is a sophisticated country. There's 80 million. It's got a fantastic culture. It goes back 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, 6,000 years. It's highly diverse. There are a lot of young people. only 70% fast in only 70% of them don't fast in Ramadan. Only 5% go to mosque on a Friday. What the Obama administration mistook was it's the old mistake, mistaking correlation for causation. The transformation has already happened at that level. Everything we know about Iran from 1979 onwards is, at the end, the key external policies of Iran are determined by the security state, and they're prepared to kill to enforce it. And nobody in Iran is going to challenge them. So which was a key transformation that the Obama administration expected, was never going to happen, and it's not going to happen. So what do you do about it?
You mean they expected a degree of social permissiveness?
Yeah,
hasn't come.
and there'd be an evolution, a political evolution. I mean, the one thing, all these people at the top, from Khamenei through to Rezai, Jafari, Shamkhani, Soleimani, and the rest agree, is we are preserving the Islamic Republic. And that's key to all of this. So that transformation is not going to happen. It's not going to happen in any sort of conceivable timescale. The thing that brought Iran to the negotiating table seriously on the nuclear file, as Amos said, was actually sanctions. It was certain sanctions. It was particularly financial sanctions and sanctions on the export of petroleum products. And the key thing was cutting Iran off from the international banking system. It was basically severing the link with SWIFT. Now that was extraordinary, and the impact it had, I think, was extraordinary. It's a thing that I think convinced Khamenei that they had to negotiate seriously, because it's a thing they wanted lifting. So when you think about what you do about constraining the other activities that Iran does, and in 15 years' time doing something about the nuclear program, it's the same stuff. But you've got to target it, because what you don't want to target it on is the 70% of people who don't fast in Ramadan, or the 95% who don't go to mosque on a Friday. You've got to distinguish between the people who make these calls and the majority of Iranians who just want a normal life in a normal globalized economy. That requires a lot of effort, because you need a lot of policy work, you need a lot of forensic work, you need a lot of... When the United States did it, they did it as an alliance between Treasury and the FBI. That just got stopped. And I think if you're doing this again, that's what you do. The other thing you do is support this socio-economic transformation that some of the states of the Gulf say they want. Now, it is massively ambitious, massively challenging. I'm not entirely sure they can do it. But if they don't do it, it'll be a disaster for all of us. And if you look at what the Emirates and Saudi want, they want an alliance, a security alliance, from Abu Dhabi to Riyadh to Cairo, stopping off in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And maybe they did have a hope it would end up in Erbil and Sulaymaniyah. I think that's gone out of the window, but it might still end up in Baku. And I think that's important, supporting that. And I think this comes back to the point that Amos was making about normalization with the Arab states. I mean, I think I absolutely agree with Amos on this. A Palestinian state of some sort is the price you pay for normalization. I do not believe that the Arab states will normalize with Israel without a Palestinian state. Not Abu Dhabi, not Saudi, not anybody. They're getting what they want already. They're getting security, cyber, intelligence cooperation. It's coming for free. Why would they normalize when this gives Iran the perfect weapon to reintegrate itself, to insinuate itself into the sympathies of Sunni Arabs throughout the region? So that's part of this. The third thing you do is go after Hezbollah in particular. Hezbollah is not just a terrorist or a prescribed terrorist organization, a political force within Lebanon, a Praetorian militia within Syria and Iraq. It's also a massive global criminal enterprise. If you look at what Hezbollah does in West Africa, in the tri-border area, in South America, in Australia, in Europe, it does money laundering, it does drugs, it does blood diamonds, it does it does everything. Go after Hezbollah in the same way as you go after Iran on the financial side. That requires looking at people, it requires looking at money flows. It's a lot of effort, and you have to sustain it over political periods. So assuming, for example, which I'm always reluctant to assume things as a positivist, but if you assume that there's going to be an election in this country sometime soon, what ideally you want is a policy that goes across electoral boundaries. That's very difficult, especially if you've got to change your government in this country. But that's something actually the Foreign Office and State Department in the United States are the same, it should, and I hate saying should, or must, but that really is a target. Constructing a coherent, credible robust policy that not just politicians of one party can buy into.
Yeah. Just one quick thing I want to follow up on that, because since you're in the communications business, this thing that John Jenkins just told us about Hezbollah being a global criminal enterprise involved in blood diamonds, did you say people trafficking as well?
Human trafficking,
Human
blood diamonds, check fraud.
Across the world, you
Everything.
mentioned Australia, Europe as well as West Africa. Do you think that's adequately known by people in this room? I'm guessing not, and maybe much more importantly, people beyond this room. Is that adequately known in the...
First of all, I should say I was in the communications business. But anyway, I think it comes to something slightly wider, which is that if you talk to officials in the US Treasury and the US administration, as John suggested, they are very hard-nosed and very serious about Hezbollah as the organisation that he's described. They do not see it in any other way. Across the Atlantic, and you talk to officials in the UK and other Europeans, there is a kind of perplexing, how can I put it? It's a kind of slightly perplexing lack of seriousness with wanting to combat Hezbollah. It's sort of whether it's a sort of magical thinking that it's also a political organisation in Lebanon, so it's all a lot more complex. And, but we have this strange situation here where people will know that, we prescribe the military wing but not the political wing. And if you go to Hezbollah HQ, there aren't two skyscrapers and it's like only people will go to the military and only people will go to the political. It's complete nonsense. But yeah, I think in Europe and the UK, we don't see it in the same way. I think what was very interesting about, if you look at some of the coverage and the way we've sort of ingested the stories of the Syrian civil war, Hezbollah are responsible for some of the most serious atrocities that took place in that civil war. But we have not seen and heard that. And I think, Israel has been saying for a very long time, Hezbollah is now one of, if not the most dangerous military organizations in the Middle East. It is not just a militia, it is a serious army. It has been working under a Russian logistical combat umbrella. It's dealing with very sophisticated equipment. It is working with the Syrian regime. It is now able to carry out complex military operations like never ever before. So we need to, I think we need to wipe our eyes.
It adds a layer when you add this global criminal organisation, besides being a very sort of muscular militia in Syria. I want to know, in a way, push you, but all three of you, on how serious this gets, because one of the questions that was sort of put to us for this session was, will Iran's push for greater influence ignite a wider conflict with Saudi in the Gulf? So you've all three of you, been talking about the hostility felt, some of it very deep and historic, from the Arab states, Gulf states towards Iran. I'm just going to push all three of you on, does that eventually lead to war? Just quick answers really on this, because we should push it forward. Do you foresee this actually turning into a conflict rather than just tension?
I don't see it turning into a conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran because Saudi Arabia would lose. I think Saudi Arabia has high capability and low competence. Iran has very high competence and low capability in terms of what it is. And that in that sort of conflict, and that sort of conflict in the Middle East, Iran, the high competence bit will win. I think, and
I want to just give people the distinction in competence and capability.
The ability to control a battlefield, the ability to exercise command and control, the ability to do logistics, the ability to plan and have strategic intent and sustain strategic intent over decades, which the Iranians have shown they can do repeatedly.
And Saudi don't have that.
Saudi do not have that. They may at some point in the next 25 years acquire it, but they don't have it at the moment, and that's a problem. But I do think there will be a conflict, which may not be meant, but I think there will be another, because you see this is coming together of forces. It's a bit like the train timetables in 1914. You see forces coming together in an area, and when forces come together in an area, all it takes is one spark.
And I suppose the answer to my question also could be, you've already had proxy conflicts in the form of Syria and Yemen.
Except which the Iranians have won, and actually the Saudis have not. I mean, there weren't many Saudi proxies in Yemen, yes, but there weren't many Saudi proxies in Syria.
What about you, Amos? Do you think this leads eventually to, beyond just tension between the Shiite Crows and the Saudi or Sunni one, into something more like all-out conflict?
They don't need to ignite conflict. There is conflict in their way. Their way is to harass and provoke Saudi Arabia. Do you know that they are launching missiles every 2 days or 3 days? They will do their best to ignite the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. However, they cannot defeat them in war. And the Saudis are afraid of Iran. So they will continue. And as it has been said, there is potential of conflict. And the Iranians are motivated to destroy Saudi Arabia, but they don't have time. Now, they are focusing now on Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. The Saudis, by the way, have failed dramatically in Saudi Arabia. They do have Hariri, they do have the Sunnis. The Sunnis are losing in Lebanon. So they do have strategic plan. You cannot judge only by separate case. You need to look. What's going on in Yemen beside the tragedy is unbelievable. They are establishing new Hezbollah in Yemen. Yemen is not state anymore. However, it's strategically is located in very important place. So they will continue this conflict, but I don't think there will be war between them because it's not serving. They do have time. I mean, it's strategic. We need to look always at the whole picture.
But you're saying that Saudi Arabia is losing where it matters in Yemen and in other places?
What I'm saying, they are losing.
Yeah. All right. We're going to come to questions in a minute. I just wanted to flip the coin a little bit on the other side of this question and talk about this Sunni Arab states and the sort of perceived alliance with Israel and whether it's below radar, etc. So this is something you hear a lot from Israeli policymakers. The Prime Minister is very fond of almost boasting about these wonderful cooperation and relationships. And often in gatherings like this, I mention what was said to me by an Israeli official is the word I'll use, who said, they always talk about it, but until I see a photograph of even a low-level official from one of these states with an Israeli, then I don't believe it. In other words, it's one of these things that's talked about and sort of conjured. I think we've talked about it. But how real is it? Is the barrier between there being some meaningful Sunni state and Israel alliance, is the barrier the thing John Jenkins referred to, namely the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Until there's movement on that, the Sunnis won't sort of come out, as it were, as allies and cooperators of Israel.
I was asked in one of the interviews I've given to give the newspaper my photos with them. And they promised me publicity and popularity. I told them even for 100% popularity, I would not give you my photos. The moment the pictures are published, there will be no more cooperation. I prefer that you suspect, that you hope for pictures and I prefer our real cooperation. I don't want to see any picture. I don't want to see any photo because it's against the DNA. They cannot normalize the relationship because they do have public opinion. It's called the Arab Street. The Arab Street is very powerful, and they can dismiss. For example, in Egypt or in other countries, you are not sent to opposition. You are sent to heaven. And in heaven, according to rumors, it's very good there, but nobody knows about it. So I don't want them at all to publish any photos with us. I do have many of them, if you want to know.
Yeah.
And I never publish them. And I hope my colleagues in Israel will do the same. We need to respect their sensitivities and not killing them by love.
I understand that. The point, I suppose, the official who made this remark to me was making was it shows you that exactly the point you made at street level there is still such hostility to Israel that even a photograph there can't be. So what I'm saying is, what would it take, and would it take movement on the Palestinian track for there ever to be the possibility of those states being open? That they would not pay a political price on the street by having relations with Israel.
I personally think that I'm not representing the government, so I don't have any limits like my friend. It's a good feeling. I'm not sure it's effective, but it's a good feeling. However, I do believe we need, with United States leadership, to energize peace process and to give chance to it. I am not optimistic about the results. We need to do our best. But if the option is between killing them by photos or by false normalization, or to have this cooperation that is saving the life of many in both sides, I prefer the secret life.
Do you want to say something on this? And then we're going to go to questions.
I think that, I mean, I agree with what Amos has said. I think there's an issue, certainly in some states, that there is instability, there are things on the horizon. John mentioned the need for economic upheaval in a lot of these countries. Why would you risk that now? If you're one of the leaders of one of these states, why risk that? Saudi Arabia is going through this huge economic transformation program. Whenever it gets going, they want to turn things around. and same as some of the other states. That is a very big risk. I think at the moment what you're going to see is lots of really good think tank conferences where ex-officials or very secure members of royal families who maybe spend a long time abroad will be very happy to share platforms with ex-Israeli officials, but I think you won't see Amos's photos for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's open this up and hear contributions, thoughts, questions, etc. I'm very keen that we have at least, I'm not even going to claim a gender balance, because there won't be a balance with 4 of us up here, but at least some questions from non-male participants in our deliberations. So I'm looking for a hand that fits into that category and not yet seeing one, so we'll start with you over here. Yeah.
Could I ask John, would you amplify on your comments on Saudi Arabia and change within the monarchy? I mean, given the bloody mess of Yemen, a failure to isolate Qatar, does Mohammed bin Salman actually have anything serious to deliver in terms of liberalization and radicalization of the Saudi state?
I don't think he gives a stuff about Qatar, quite honestly. And so the issue about failing to isolate Qatar, I mean, it's trivial. I don't think it's going to be amended anytime soon. Everybody was fixated this last week on this conference, which I was invited to but couldn't go to, which announced this new city development up on the Straits of Tiran of blessed memory. And of course the robot, the female robot to whom they gave citizenship. This is flim-flam. Neom is the city. This is flim-flam. The important, what he wants to do is change the underlying assumptions of the Saudi state on which they based their model, certainly since 1979. And go and produce a state which looks more like the Emirates, which has this more socially permissive superstructure and this highly securitized base. And actually, if you look at public opinion in Saudi Arabia, and it exists, people do polling, and they're all over social media, most young Saudis like it. Now, the question then is, what does success look like, which is your point. Now, Yemen is actually a disaster. They need to find a solution. And the solution in Yemen actually is a solution that they had in 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15. It's the same solution. They just need to cut their losses. But this is a question of framing a win. You have to look as if you're winning. The next step is going to be the Aramco IPO, if it exists, or whatever happens to Aramco, because that's going to be the real test. That's going to be where the rubber hits the road. And there's talk about selling to the Chinese, which may work. But something will happen. And then, ultimately, the key question in Saudi, as it is in every other state in the Middle East, is jobs for young people. Because the level of unemployment, youth unemployment in the Middle East is very high. The level of female unemployment is even higher because a lot of it is disguised because of a lack of female recorded participation in the economy. That's the big issue. And they recognize this. They should have done this 20 years ago. They're doing it now. I think the chances, it's very balanced. But I think from our point of view, if I think about what our policy is in this country, we should support this, because what's the alternative? It fails, I mean, that's going to be a disaster. So I'm what as Gramsci said, it's pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will.
Very nice. Let's take a few, because there were several hands I've seen. We'll start with you here. Yeah. Do we need a microphone? If we do, then the lady here.
Thank you. This is another question for Sir John. I'm just curious to learn a bit more about this sort of Emirates-style gentrification that you talk about, because I suppose in the Middle East it's not just the UAE, it's also, you can see it in places like Erbil in Kurdistan, where they sort of got these Malibu-style boulevards popping up. Do you think that this is sort of a viable solution for somewhere like the West Bank and Gaza? I mean, would it satiate the socio-economic appetite of the young people, and would it sort of neutralise radical Islamist elements?
Thank you. Don't answer that just yet, because there's a whole lot of hands now, and I want to get several in, if I can. Yeah, the question here.
Thank you. I think Saudi Arabia and Pakistan were touched upon, but I didn't hear much about that. So that's one aspect. And also Israel, India, Afghanistan. Any views on that?
On the relationship between India.
Israel and India.
India, Afghanistan.
Yeah, thank you. Let's have the microphone here if we can. The gentleman here has been waiting. And then perhaps we'll get it back there. Yeah.
Yeah, question to all three of you. Really, Jonathan Paris, what James was getting at about Hezbollah, I think it goes further than global finance. I think it has to do with how they've integrated themselves with the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard are the commanders. The operational command is under Hezbollah. The fighters are the hollowed-out militias from Shia militias from Iraq or Syria. These guys can go anywhere. They are transnational. And to counter that, this is where I get back to your wonderful point about capabilities and competence. Well, to beat this capability, this transnational capability that Qasem Soleimani has organized, why not bring some of the competence of Israel together with the capabilities of Saudi Arabia?
Thank you. And let's just squeeze in this last, in this round, this will probably, it may actually end up being our last one, but let's see. Gentleman there, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I look at the topic of this panel, challenges, future, and opportunities. We have a very distinguished panel, a military man, a diplomat, and a media man. For me, I came here with some kind of hope, maybe to hear something hopeful. Yes. I expect maybe to hear from the military man challenges in the Middle East, and I'm not disappointed.
Okay. Right.
Well, for the media man, I thought we could hear maybe some good news. And for the diplomat who said, well, he is no more a diplomat, I expected to hear maybe opportunities. Somehow I may walk out here with the fear that there is no future.
Okay, let me make
And
sure
there is no
redress that
opportunities.
with his
It is really very hopeless.
Okay, let's see if
Can you give us some hope?
Good. Let's do that. Thank you very much. Because we've got 10 minutes before we have to conclude. So maybe this may be the chance to do that. I'm going to do that for you at the end. I'll ask all three of you for something that makes you hopeful and that you regard as an opportunity. But let's just tackle these specific questions while we have them. What about this question about the India and Pakistan and the relationship there? I know that Israel's relations with India have strengthened in recent years. I think it was you who mentioned, one of you mentioned the role of Pakistan in terms of nuclear activity. I think in terms of technology that had been acquired. The Saudis were interested in technology from Pakistan. I think it was you who mentioned it. So why don't you take that first, Amos Gilad? India, Pakistan, their relationship with Israel and some of its neighbors.
Among the miracles, I've spoken about miracles. I don't know why you are complaining against hope. I'm protesting against it. I've mentioned opportunities and so on. But, okay. India is among our miracles. To have such friendship with India is beyond my expectations and dreams. When we have begun with India, we did have consulate in Mumbai that was limited 4 kilometers. Now Mr. Modi, Prime Minister, has visited Israel, and it embodies unbelievable friendship with the biggest democracy, and we do have widening friendship. The problem is that the Pakistanis get worse and worse. They are relying more and more, that's hope, by the way, they are relying more and more on madrasat infrastructure and less on the British education. And they are relying more and more on generals, and they do have 100 warheads of nuclear, and this is a failed state. And my prediction for them is that they will be worse, and they do have vicious plans even to provoke India. For example, to carry out another Mumbai act of terror that was a military hostile operation.
Who are their allies in the region? Who are they working with?
In the region?
Yeah, in your region.
They do have, first of all, I'm not sure they need allies in our area. They do have excellent relationship with Saudi Arabia, but when Saudi Arabia asked them to help them, they said, okay, we would consider it.
25% of Shia.
Yeah, of course, Shiite, but they know that Yemen is a swamp. They are clever enough
Do you see the...
But their allies, the main ally of Pakistan is China, by the way.
Yeah.
No, I just
And
wondered...
that's the main issue because it's a part, in the Chinese eyes, a part of the conflict, the hidden conflict between
Yes.
China and India.
I don't want to wander on to that. I just was thinking, you've set out for us this split between the Sunni and the Shia crescents in the region. I'm asking you where you think Pakistan might align itself. I take from your answer about Saudi Arabia that you think it will put itself with the Sunni group of nations, but maybe not. So that's why I'm asking.
First, he's better exposed than me, but I can share with you one sentence. Pakistan is marginal vis-à-vis our relationship and conflict. They are not marginal vis-à-vis their nuclear power, the extremism in Pakistan, their feeling of frustration. They are so frustrated, it's very frightening. They hate the guts of India, and they are supported heavily and massively by China.
Yeah.
And they do have suspicious connections with Saudi Arabia. If Iran, for example, develops nuclear weapon, I think the Saudis will develop with Pakistanis. They have paid them, I think, the money. There were many visits of Prince Abdullah before he was king, and he is not the one who wastes his time. I mean, this is among the hidden threats that might erupt.
Yeah. All right, let's rattle through this because we want to get on to reasons to be cheerful. So why don't we hear from you, John Jenkins, in response to the question
Okay.
we were asked about, is the Emirates a viable solution, model for the West Bank and Gaza? Do you think that's what people would want there, and would it neutralise the appetite for Islamist alternatives?
Okay, first of all, if you want hope, go somewhere else in the Middle East. That's my advice. And it's not you look around the Middle East and look at the Emirati model. And the Emirati, if you look at what people voted for when they get the chance to vote in elections, they vote for services, they vote for jobs, they vote for a better future for themselves and their kids than they had before. They vote for all the things that everyone else votes for in Egypt, in Libya, and so forth. So and you look at the young people, they are vibrant. There is a vibrant culture around the Middle East. There is in the occupied territories. The thing that's missing in a lot of these places, and the thing that makes the elections not work, is governance, is the institutions of statehood. This goes back to the 1920s. That's the thing you have to focus on, because if you want to harness these energies, and this is something that the Emiratis have recognised, and I think the Saudis have recognised, you need institutions, domestic institutions that are legitimate and have the authority you talked about, the consent, that actually make it possible to harness those energies. And this is when I think about the Palestinian Authority and the rest of it, these institutions do not exist in the Palestinian Authority either. The Palestinian Authority is deeply corrupt and deeply incompetent. And I think one of the problems with this, and all Palestinians know this, if you talk to Palestinians, they have, by and large, a lot of contempt for the Palestinian Authority. That's the thing you need to put in place. Otherwise, you'll simply have an economy sustained by donor funding, which is what it is at the moment, providing a fantastic life for everybody who lives in Ramallah, but not a particularly great life anywhere else. That's the thing you need. And it's this issue of statehood, because that's the thing that makes the choice for Hamas real. This issue about reconciliation in the Middle East, do me a favour. It never happens.
It gives hope.
It gives hope, maybe. But it's irrelevant. You don't need this. You just need a state. And then Hamas can decide whether they want to be part of this state or a bunch of outlaws.
Would recognition from the British government, because it was a question Emily Thornberry was asked and it's come up during the day, would recognition from the British government of Palestinian statehood help in the kind of governance sphere you're talking about?
It's a gesture. It's gestural politics. I mean, it's the sort of thing you do when you can't think of anything else to do, if you ask me.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put to you, James Serene, the question there about would it make sense for Israel to ally its capabilities and competencies with Saudi Arabia's, and in a way, I suppose Amos Khaled suggested that is actually happening below radar anyway. But to kick off with that, and I want from you, I'm going to all of you, one reason, one takeaway for everyone here of something that gives them hope in this region that is too easily described as hopeless.
I think, yeah, it's a good question. I think that you can bring that capability together. I think from what we're hearing, there already is some Israeli capability marrying up with, other ideas from those countries, particularly in the Gulf, whether you hear about it or not. But yeah, I think some of that is happening. We're not quite sure where it will go over the next few years, but that is certainly a trend. In terms of hope, yeah, I mean, you might be in the wrong conference, but I think that if we look at our starting point of 1917 and you see what has actually been achieved in the Middle East, yeah, beyond all the conflict and all the very bad things, You know, we started off with the Balfour Declaration and a stepping stone to the State of Israel. The State of Israel is a success story, a huge success story. The state system, the nation-state system that was set up by the British and the French and the League of Nations after the First World War, I think the architects of that would be shocked that it's still standing in some form 100 years later. And we should have hope by the things that have surprised us. I mean, I think, you know, yes, there's a very big problem with some of the republics and how they've crumbled over the last few years, but I think the monarchies have surprised everyone. And, you know, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, you know, they are still going against all the odds. That's on the state level. A very simple point. I know this is a bit trite, but I think if you look at what social media and communications revolution has done to our ability to look into each other's lives and to interact and understand each other, if it is going to be the Middle East of the future is going to be for the kind of under 25s, then those under 25s have greater capacity to look into each other's lives and interact with each other than they've ever had before in history. Whether they use that just to get a feed of things that radicalise them, or whether they actually use that to properly have their views challenged, we don't know, but they certainly have the ability to do it, well, never before.
Thank you. We're looking for reasons to be hopeful. I would say that one of the things for Israelis that you said is that Israelis, Amos Gilad, feel more secure now than they perhaps ever have. So you would perhaps, from the Israeli point of view, file that under causes for hope. But for others who are here, what can you give us that you see as either an opportunity or a reason to be hopeful?
We do have many reasons to be hopeful. First of all, as I've mentioned, our strengths, the military, the economy, the lowest level of terror, the cooperation with our worst enemies that have become our best partners. Even the Iranian challenge has some good hope because it's uniting all of us against it. So that's another reason. That's it.
Okay, he got there. Let's hear for reasons to be hopeful from you.
You know, it's young people, basically, but you need to be able to harness the energies. There's a thriving Saudi stand-up comic circuit. If you get onto social media, get on Facebook or Twitter, you can find these out there. That, for me, is fantastic. Who knew that Saudi had stand-up comics? You can find this everywhere in the Middle East. But to make it more than a stand-up comedy circuit, you need effective governance. You need effective governance to make young people's aspirations dream. But it's young people. That's the hope. 70% of the population below the age of 30. That's the hope.
Thank you very much. I think we did get some opportunities and reasons to be, well, if not optimistic, then at least not totally cataclysmically pessimistic. I think it only remains for me to thank our three panellists. I'm sure you're going to want to join me in doing that. James Serene, Amos Gilad, and Sir John Jenkins. Thank you all very much.